do it inside again. And this is the first mission of this new parak. It's important for us to start off correctly. So the parak is going to talk about the arba minim, the four species. Each one gets its own set of rules, and talks about different situations where these species are invalid, and of course there are some cases where it is valid. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lulav and esrog and hadasim aravais, they have number one, they have certain rules about each one, and number two, they have rules that are more like generic for all of them, and then there's rules in general about all mitzvahs. So you have, like, for example, creates hadar kapais tamarim. The lulav is called the kapais tamarim, so there's going to be special laws about the lulav called kapais tamarim. We're going to see what that means. Kafos and so on. It has certain rules of how it's needs to at least be capable of being tied together and so on. Or it's
Thank you.
Or according to one opinion, it has to actually be very tight together. So that's a law that's applicable to the actual mitzvah of lulav. Then you have that are applicable to the arba minim, which the Gemara says is like the law of hadar. Hadar is the law of beautification, and that concept of hadar is a learned to in the Gemara as a hekesh. It's going to compare it to the other four species, that they all should be beautiful. So there's a certain element of beauty in all of this. And then you have just general laws, which we're going to see. For example, mitzvah haba ba'avera, when you have mitzvahs that are connected, when you're doing the mitzvah with an avera type of item, which we'll see how the Gemara explains it, that's applicable to all mitzvahs. It's problematic to do a mitzvah with something that's stolen. In fact, we had in Gemara brachas about things that you're not allowed to recite a bracha on food that is not kosher, because it's a similar idea, at least, that it's you're not praising Hashem, you are menait. It says in the Gemara brachas, if you're not praising Hashem, you are desecrating and like rebelling and so on, saying something that's inappropriate. Because this is not what Hashem wants. You're going against Hashem. You're sort of like rebelling. So here also we have some laws that are, for example, Rashi gives an example of zekeli v'anvehu, that there are certain there's certain laws that we need to beautify. There's a law about beautifying the mitzvahs, and all applies to all mitzvahs. It's supposed to do hidur mitzvah. We, of course, just came from Hanukkah, and we had mahadrin, minha mahadrin, different levels of beautification of the mitzvah of Hanukkah. So that law of hidur mitzvah is learned from the pasuk in Oz Yashir, where it says zekili v'anvehu, this is my God, and I will beautify him. And at least Rashi learns that that's one of the issues here of dried out lulav is not considered zekeli v'anvehu. Of course, the commentaries say, what are you bringing from v'anvehu? It would seem that there's a different source by the arba minim, by the four species. There's a different source that that it's not just learned from zekeli v'anvehu, because zekeli v'anvehu is a law that's more like a bonus law. It's a law that you're encouraged to beautify the mitzvah, but if you didn't beautify it, you self-fulfilled the mitzvah. But when it comes to the lulav and esrog, we're saying that it's actually not kosher if it's dried out. But if it's the source of that not being kosher is zekeli v'anvehu, this is my God, I will beautify him, that's not a very strong source, because that source is generally used in cases just to encourage us to beautify mitzvahs more than we're obligated to, and it's like an extra bonus. But it doesn't invalidate the mitzvah if you didn't beautify it. And here, right, if the person just lit one candle for Hanukkah, did he fulfill the mitzvah? He did fulfill the mitzvah of Hanukkah. It's a mitzvah. It's nice to beautify the mitzvah. Mahadrin, mina mahadrin. Very nice to beautify the mitzvah, but do you fulfill the mitzvah? The Gemara says you fulfilled it. This is the mitzvah. Rashi says here, you got to beautify the mitzvahs, and if you didn't, a lulav hayavesh is puzzle. It's invalid. So, of course, this is a question Teves asked on Rashi, and of course, topic of discussion. Why is Rashi bringing this Zekeli Van Vehu? And that's not normally used to invalidate something. That's used to encourage us to beautify mitzvahs, but not to invalidate if you don't do it. So the Mishnah starts off with lulav hagozel, the stolen lulav. I'm starting again from the beginning. We're on page 29b. Lulav hagozel, if you have a stolen lulav, and Rashi tells us that we're talking specifically about the lulav, we're not just saying the word lulav and we mean all the species that are joined together. No, we're talking about the lulav itself. If it's stolen or if it's dried out, v'hayavesh is puzzle, it's invalid. Now, if it's stolen, what is the problem with the stolen lulav? The problem with stolen lulav is that it's not yours. And we learned, lakachtem lochem, has to be, you take of yours. And the understanding in the Gemara is that it actually has to be yours, your own. You can't take someone else's. So if it's stolen, it would not be considered your own, and you did not fulfill the mitzvah. The hayavesh, if it's dried out, and this is where Rashi says you're not doing the mitzvah in a beautiful way of zekeli v'anvehu, and it's puzzle, it's invalid. Shel ashera v'shel irani dachas, if it's a lulav that was worshipped from an Asherah tree. Asherah was a type of avodah zarah, of where they would worship a tree, and they would, I guess, bow down to it, and that tree was considered, not a person's not allowed to benefit from it, and if a person has a lulav from it, that lulav would be invalid. Shel irani dachas, if it's from a city that had people had encouraged, motivated the residents of that city to worship avodah zarah. It's called the irani dachas, and the whole city has to be burned. And if the city is obligated to be burned together with all its possessions, so what happens is all the possessions in the city are now considered as if they are burned. And if it's considered as if it is burned, those is not burned yet, but it's considered as if it's burned, then it means you don't have the proper measurement of a lulav because it's considered that it's burned. So you would not be able to use that lulav to fulfill the mitzvah. So this is the meaning. This is the reason why a lulav of an irhani dachas. Now, of course, we mentioned that it has to be talking about that the lulav was already detached from the tree, and in that case, it's going to be burned with all the possessions of the city, and it will not be the proper measurement. It's considered invalid for a lulav. Okay, then it talks about niktam roishoi. If its top was clipped off, the top of the lulav, it's puzzle, it's invalid. And the reason is, Rashi says here, it's not hadar, it's not beautiful. Now, generally, in the laws of the arba minim, the four species, generally something that's not visible to the eye does not invalidate. If it's so small, it's not visible to the eye, it won't invalidate it. So here also, seemingly it would only be if it's visible, if it's a tiny dot is missing, seemingly that should not invalidate the lulav. If it's it has to be if it's not hadar, not beautiful, then that would be a problem. And of course, this is a topic of discussion where when the top is clipped off, what does it mean that the top is clipped off? Is it the top of the upper leaves? Is it the one leaf that's the middle one? Um, what is it the majority of the leaves? This is a topic of the discussion among the Rishonim, and we will, Mitzvah Hashem, go into it as we learn further. Nifritzu olav, if the leaves were ripped off from the spine, so then again it's puzzle, it is invalid, even though you attach them together by tying them together. But the fact is, it would not be kosher in such a situation. It's Rashi again uses this term. It's not hadar. It's not beautiful. Then the Mishnah says nifredu olav. Now nifredu does not mean that they are torn off, but it means that they're still attached, but they are separated. As a lulav grows, they actually become the leaves become more and more separated, and they start growing apart. And as that grows even further, it actually gets very hard, and they stiffen. So the lulav, when it's at a younger stage, and it's capable of being tied together, after the later stage is actually not capable of being tied together because they get hard, it gets hardened. And the first opinion in the Mishnah is nifredu olav, it's kosher, and even though it's spreading out, it's kosher. That's the first opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Omer yagdenu malmaila. Yagdenu malmaila means you got to tie it from above, and tie it from above means you gotta tighten it and make it actually all in one. Make it like in one piece. Make it like a tight together lulav, palm branch. Now what does the first opinion hold here? What does the Tanakama really hold? That you don't have to tie it together. You don't have to tie it together. Rabbi Yehuda says you got to tie it together. The first opinion holds you don't have to tie it together. What's the reason why you don't have to tie it together? It's seemingly because it's capable of being moved together. That's good enough, according to the Tanakama, according to the first opinion. Reader says no, it actually has to physically be tied together in order for it to be a kosher lulav. So in other words, the question is, to what extent do we obligate you to have it together? Does it have to actually be together, fully together, or is it more that it's capable of being together? It's not at the later stage where it's impossible to tie it together because it's already hardened. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Yagdenu Momailo should tie it from above the lulav, the leaves of the lulav, tie them together so that they look like they're one with the spine, and it's not like leaves that are separated. Then comes the next case in the Mishnah, which of course we'll see in the Gemara what it means. Sine hara barzel. Sine means the palm trees. The palm trees of Har HaBarzel, this mountain of iron. So these palm trees from the mountain of iron, what's the law with them? Kesheros, they are kosher. That's what the Mishnah says. Then it mentions what the measurement of a lulav has to be. Lulav sheyesh by shloisha tefachim. Lulav has 3 handbreadths. To shake, to be able to shake with it. Kosher, it is kosher. Now, what is the meaning of that sentence? That it's 3 handbreadths in order to shake. The meaning of it is that it needs to have 3 handbreadths similar to the Hadassah in the Aravas. And plus another hand breadth, which is like a word missing in the Mishnah. It's ukadei lananea boy, and in addition to the three hand breaths, like the hadassim that are tied to it, and it's in addition to that kadei lananea boy, the amount, an extra tefach to be able to shake, and that will be consider altogether 4 hand breaths would be the measurement of a lulav. Kosher, that would be kosher. So if you have that amount, then it's good enough. Then it would be enough to be considered a kosher lulav, and that's the rule that needs to have 4 hand breaths. Now I mentioned yesterday in the measuring of a lulav of how many hand breaths. A hand breath is you just put, it's basically like 3.5 inches. It's basically making a fist. That's a tefach. And if you do it 3 times, so you could actually use your fist and you could measure your hadassim and aravis. And the lulav needs to have 4 of these. So you do it 4 times. You just put your hand next to each other and you go by. But obviously not everyone's hand is the same size. So if you want to be very exact, you could use a measuring tape, and it's like 3.1 inches, 3.1 something inches is considered, according to Rabbi Avram Chaim Noah, the measurement of a tefach. But if you're going to have extra, so then you don't have to be so exact, that there's more. It's good enough. You just you use your hand and your fist, and you could measure it yourself. Now, weird as the measuring, but what I wanted to say was the way to measure it is that it doesn't go by the whole length of the lulav. It ends by where the spine finishes and breaks into branches. Generally, the end of the spine breaks into 3 branches. And those 3 branches are like the highest branches generally in the lulav, and that's what the spine breaks into. So if you ever look at a lulav carefully, a lot of people, when they buy their lulav, if it's a little open, then in other words, if it's not extremely tight, so one of the things you need to do is check your lulav. Once it's not tight, sometimes that middle leaf, it cracks in half, it breaks, it splits at its seam, and it ends up sometimes being non-kosher. Very common problem, which we'll be talking about. And the concept of the top, the highest leaf not being split in 2. And as every leaf of the lulav is a double leaf. It's folded, and often that fold is actually it cracks by the fold. It breaks. It splits by the fold. And when you check that leaf, when you buy a lulav, when you later on during Sukkot, after you've shaken your lulav a lot of times, sometimes that causes it to, then it bangs into the fan in your shul, and or if your sukkah is too low, which is very common on these prefab sukkahs, where they make it 7 feet, which you can hardly, you got to like bend down to shake your lulav. So which is a big problem, because it often bangs into the ceiling, into the schach. But the bottom line is that when you check your lulav to see, there you will find that when the spine of the lulav ends, it breaks into 3 branches, and the middle one is the one that you're normally concerned about, that it shouldn't be broken, shouldn't be cracked. Now, so I mention that now because what I'm trying to emphasize is that the measurement of the 4 hand breaths ends at the point where it breaks into 3 branches. That's the end of the spine. Now, the beginning of the spine is the bottom of the lulav, the bottom part of the lulav. I've seen, and I don't know if it's according to everyone, but I have seen that some say that the measuring of for the bottom part of the lulav starts where you have two branches on either side, two leaves on either side. So I don't know if everyone agrees with that, but there seems to be a chumrah, at least if someone wants to be strict and follow that, that in other words, you don't actually count the protrusion of the lulav as it goes further, as it extends downward, if there's no leaves on its side. Now, if those leaves are cut off for whatever reason, because you wanted to make rings with those leaves or something, then the measuring of the 4 handbreadths doesn't start there. It really starts where there's 2 leaves, one on each side. We'll have to see if the Rishonim or who follow, if that's the accepted view, or is that just a individual understanding. But I have seen it brought down, such a concept that the measuring of the bottom side of the lulav also is not as simple as it sounds. It's not just wherever the bottom is cut. That's where you start measuring from. It could be that you're supposed to measure from where there's 2 leaves, one on each side. That's when you start measuring the 4 handbreadths of the lulav. So that basically covers the meaning of the Mishnah. And the final line of the Mishnah was kedei l'nanei abai. It's really ukedei l'nanei abai. That means 3 plus a tefach kedei l'nanei abai, in order to wave the lulav. And of course, we'll see more about this in the Gemara. Now, the Gemara starts off and says, "Kapasik v'tani." It comes and gives a vague ruling that is, or just an absolute ruling of puzzle, that it's invalid. It comes and gives a absolute ruling of that it's invalid in a case where the lulav is stolen, and it doesn't differentiate between the first day and the other days of Yom Tov. Let's read it inside. Kapasik v'tani. It comes and gives a blanket rule of puzzle, that it's invalid, and it teaches this, and it makes it more like an absolute rule without giving qualifications or exceptions, and it makes it like it's a set rule for all cases. Kapasik v'tani. It comes in and gives a general rule, and it teaches that it's invalid if it's stolen. It doesn't make a difference if it's on the first day. It doesn't make a difference if it's on the second day of Yom Tov. Now, when the Gemara says it doesn't make a difference if it's on the second day of Yom Tov, it's referring to the simple understanding is referring to an Eretz Yisrael on the second day Yom Tov, when it's called Chol HaMoed. So call it Yom Tov Sheni. And the reason I say that is because outside of Eretz Yisrael, we keep another day of Yom Tov. And if we keep another day of Yom Tov, it's called a suffix of the first day. It's a suffix of day 1 of Yom Tov. And there are differences of opinion regarding the laws on the second day of Yom Tov and outside of Israel and the first day. Now, do we follow a different set of rules with regard to Lulav and Esrei? Or do we put it that it's the same? Do we say that the rules of the first day, apply to the second day as well? Or do we say no, the second day is we're, of course, following this minhag of Asenu B'Yodenu, became a tradition to keep a second day Yom Tov, but the laws of the lulav follow, that's rabbinic. The lulav laws we don't have to follow the same stringencies as we would follow on the first day. So the bottom line is the Gemara is surprised that the Mishnah didn't differentiate, and the Gemara would have liked to see that the Mishnah would say on the first day a stolen lulav is invalid because it's got to be yours. But on the other days of Sukkah, including the second day, it would be okay if it's not yours, even if it's stolen. That's what the Gemara seems to expect the Mishnah should say. It doesn't. The Mishnah makes it a blanket rule that it's always invalid. And the Gemara says, Bishloime Yavesh, I understand if it's dried out, Hadar Ba'inon, Veleko, we need it to be beautiful, and you don't have that. So that would apply to all days. The law of Yavesh, dried out, I understand that there's no qualification in the Mishnah and no exception. Whenever it is dried out, it is invalid. But the case of stolen, that I would have expected there to be a differentiation between the first day and the other days. And again, we're not talking about outside of Israel where you have a second day Yom Tov. Let's leave that to the side. We're talking about in Eretz Yisrael, the first day versus the other days of Yom Tov. In Eretz Yisrael, the other days of Chol Hamoed, I should say, those the Gemara expected there should be a differentiation between the first day and the other days. Ela Gozel Bishlam Yom Tov Rishon, by stolen lulav, and it's good on the first day of Yom Tov. As it says Lachem, says about the first day it should be yours. Mishalochem, and we darshan, we learn from that pasuk that it has to be yours and not stolen. Ela Yom Tov Sheni on my life, but why would that be a problem on the second day? The second day seemingly is a rabbinic law, and it shouldn't that law shouldn't apply. That it mentions that it says that it has to be yours. So what the Gemara is really getting at is you really have to know the history of the laws of lulav. What do I mean? Well, we do shake the lulav all days of Sukkot. However, we don't shake the lulav all days of Sukkot on a biblical level. Why not? Because the lulav, even at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, when you if you were not in the Beis Hamikdash, you did not shake the lulav more than once. You would have shaken the lulav on the first day of Sukkot, and after that, you don't go to shake it. The Kohanim that are work serving in the Beis Hamikdash, they shake it every day of Sukkot. Why? Because the pasuk talks about the lulav. It says Lefnei Hashem Elokechem, before Hashem, Shivas Yamim, 7 days. So the Gemara understands that it means you're going to celebrate 7 days. Lefnei Hashem Elokechem, before Hashem, to mean that in the Beis Hamikdash you need to shake the lulav every single day. So, however, outside of Beis Hamikdash, you only shake it 1 day. That's the rule. That's the official rule. Once you shake the lulav, and you got to know that fact before you learn this Gemara. Now, Yochanan comes along, says, no. We got to make a takana. We have to make a decree. What's the decree? The decree is that every day of Sukkot, you're going to shake the lulav, just like they did the Beis Hamikdash, as a commemoration of the Beis Hamikdash. It's a commemoration. Beis Hamikdash, they shake it every day. Okay, now anywhere outside of Israel, anywhere outside, you would even of course in Israel as well now, because we're in a time of Golus. So the entire world, as a commemoration of Beis Hamikdash, Mehera Yibana Hamikdash, commemoration that the Beis Hamikdash should be built soon, that we should all shake lulav and esrog every single day. So this is a rabbinic law to shake lulav and esrog every day. Now, what laws apply to the lulav and esrog of the other days of Sukkot? And what laws apply to the first day of Sukkot? So the way Rashi learns is that something that's stolen, so that would apply, that would be a special law. If it's stolen, that would be a law applicable to specifically the lulav, l'kachtem lochem, and the arba minim, I should say. It's a law applicable specifically to the arba minim. Why? It says l'kachtem lochem, and you should take for yourself. By Yom HaRishon on the first day, creates Hadar, Kapis Tvarim, this creates Hadar. So Lachem should be yours. That's what the Gemara understands from the word Lachem. So it means that these 4 species have to be yours and not stolen. So that seems to only say B'Yom HaRishon on the first day. Because it says B'Yom HaRishon, we would understand that that would be on the first day. And the other days are rabbinic. And there you should be allowed to use even a stolen lulav. What about the law of Yavesh? Dried out. So Rashi says that's part of the law of Zakeli V'Anveyu. That's part of the law of beautifying the mitzvahs. Now that law applies to all mitzvahs. So that's not just a law on the first day. That would seemingly be effective for all mitzvahs, and it should apply even on the other days. So therefore the Gemara is understanding that Yavesh, the law of Yavesh, of dried out, is going to apply all days of Yom Tov, all days of Chol Hamoed. Why? You got to serve Hashem with mitzvahs and beautify the mitzvahs, according to Rashi at least. So it's not surprising that it'll apply even to rabbinic laws, to biblical laws, to rabbinic laws. If the lulav is dried out, it's not going to be kosher. But a stolen, that it says B'Yom HaRishon. That the pasuk says that it's applicable B'Yom HaRishon. And that the understanding is that should only apply to the biblical law of the lulav. That should only apply to the biblical law of the lulav. It shouldn't apply to the other days of Sukkot. Now, what's interesting is Teves is question Rashi about Zakeli V'Anveyu. Instead, Teves says, you know why you can't have a stolen, why can't you have a dried out lulav? You have a dried out lulav because it says creates Hadar, right? That's the way Teves lives. And so according to Teves, that it's because of Hadar. So think about the pasuk. It says, Lakachtem lochem, you got to be yours, B'Yom HaRishon, creates Hadar. This fruit, this beautiful fruit. According to Teves, you have to ask the question, why is the Gemara comfortable with when it's dried out? The Gemara is comfortable with that that it's invalid even on the other days. Because it says creates Hadar. But in the same pasuk it says, well, it has to be yours, which means it can't be stolen. So the question really is, why is the Gemara more comfortable with the law of it not being Hadar, it's invalid, all days of Sukkot, but it's not comfortable with the law that if it's stolen, it's invalid all days of Sukkot? It's all from the same pasuk. So the Gemara is very interesting that it's very comfortable with Bishleima Yavesh. Yavesh is good. I understand that all the days of Sukkot, it's not going to be valid. It's Yavesh. It's not Hadar. How do you know Hadar? Teves says that you learn Hadar from that same pasuk. It says creates Hadar. It's the same pasuk that says L'kachtem lochem, has to be yours. So why is the Gemara so much more comfortable with the issue of the Hadar issue? If it's dried out, it's invalid all the days of Sukkot, not just the first day, but stolen. That you have to differentiate between the first day and the other days. That's this is a question that Teves asks on his own way of learning. On Rashi, it's not such a question because Rashi is learning that the law of Hadar, beauty, is not from the Esrog. It's really learned from the general law of beautifying mitzvahs. So according to Rashi, it's not surprising. Of course, it applies to all mitzvahs. That law applies to all mitzvahs. According to Teves, it's from the other word in the same pasuk. So why is one case we're comfortable that it's going to be applicable to all 7 days of Sukkot, and the other word in the same pasuk, we're saying, how could you say it applies to all days of Sukkot? So this is a question that is an issue that Teves deals with, and it's specifically an issue on Teves. Okay. Now the Gemara continues. I should also mention, well, before we continue in the Gemara, I should also mention something also that we mentioned yesterday. That what does it mean dried out? Dried out. Teves wanted to say that dried out is not that it's 12 months old. That although we find such a term used with regard to yayin nesef, wine of an idol worshiper, that we're concerned that he poured it for. So there's poured it for Avodah Zarah, to might have had in mind idol worship, mixed it or pushed it and caused it to become invalid. So that's a law regarding wine that yavesh, if it's dried out, could be changes the status. So the question is that the same dried out here? Taisa says no. Here it's not based on time. It's based on if it's really dried out. It doesn't matter how much time it is. If it's dried out, that it would break, it would crumble if you put pressure with your if you put pressure on the lulav and it's dried out with your fingernail, your tzipora, and your fingernail. If you put pressure on it, it'll like crumble. That would be a sign that it's dried out. Now, the other commentaries are not comfortable with that, because even though that applies, there is such a concept to by a bechor, by a firstborn animal, that he has a blemish on his ear, and the law over there is that it's considered completely dried out if it's dissolves, if it crumbles when he puts pressure with his finger. That's a law over there, fine. However, they say if you have old lovim, many of you have old lovim. We used to have 2 big piles of all the old lovim in my house many years ago when we lived in Rhode Island. We had like a vase that we had all these old lovim. They were there for years. So the practical side of it is, if you press it with your fingernail, it doesn't crumble for years. It still stays. So other Rishonim don't want to agree with Teves. They disagree, and they say it doesn't mean that it's going to crumble, but it means that there's no green left at all. That's dried out, not if it crumbles. That could take years and decades, and who knows what. It's not going to crumble. So from the practical side of it, they don't want to agree with Teves. They want to say the Rosh, Tur, they want to say that it's really the certain dryness, dried out, that it has, that causes it to be yavesh, invalid, because it's dried out. Okay, so getting back to the Gemara had asked this question, and then Reb Amar Reb Yochanan Mishum Shimon ben Yochai. So Reb Yochanan said in the name of Reb Shimon bar Yochai, Mishum, and now we turn the page. We're on page 30. Mishum dahavalei mitzvah ba'aveira. So he says, you know what the problem is? Why is this invalid even on the other days of Sukkot if it's stolen? Called mitzvah ba'aveira. Mitzvah ba'aveira is, of course, a topic of much discussion. Much ink has been spilled on this topic. That when do we say a mitzvah ba'aveira? It's the mitzvah that comes through an aveira, with an aveira. It's considered you sort of like lose the merit of the mitzvah, and so this would be one of those cases where you stole a lulav, and then for whatever reason you want to use it on Sukkot. And on this, the Mishnah said, you stole it. It's not only not good for the first day, because the first day it has to be lochem, has to be yours. It's not good for even the other days of Sukkot, because it's called a mitzvah haba ba'avera. It's a mitzvah that comes through an avera. Now, what does this mean? What it means is that when a person needs a lulav and he takes one, he steals a lulav in order to shake the lulav. So the thing is that case, even if, and as we'll see in the Gemara, even if the owner, he gives up hope from ever retrieving that lulav, so there's room to say that it's yours. You stole it, and now it's yours. Of course, you'll have to pay him back whatever they ever catch you. If you want to do tshuva, you'll have to pay him back the $100 that this lulav cost, whatever it costs. Just give it an example of $100. Actually, lulavim are more like 30 bucks for the nice dairy lulav. So you stole a dairy lulav. It costs about 30, 40 bucks, let's say, 40 bucks, let's say. So you stole this lulav. So now the owner gave up hope. The owner gave up hope. You do not have to return that lulav. You'll owe him 40 bucks. You know, pay him off slowly. You'll owe him 40 bucks for the lulav. Okay. But you don't. So you own it. You're the real owner. But nevertheless, you can't use it for the mitzvah. You can't use it for the mitzvah because it's a mitzvah above avir. So you might own it because he gave up hope. You own it, but you can't do a mitzvah with it because it's called a mitzvah above avir. It's like disgusting to use this for a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that came through an avera. This is inappropriate to use. You can't get a mitzvah for doing something like that, stealing someone else's thing and trying to fulfill a mitzvah. You know, can you imagine the craziness of such a thing? You don't mind stealing, but you want I need to shake lulav. You go rob a bank, but gonna miss shaking lulav. You go steal from the store lulav, but you go steal from the store, but what are you doing with it? You're gonna shake a lulav. Sounds a little strange, but this is the store. This is the case. So the point is that mitzvah above avera. It's a very big topic. And the case here is that you got the lulav because you stole it. Now, when you actually steal, you stole it, yesterday. I'm shaking the lulav today. No, it's called a mitzvah b'avera. That's at least the simple understanding. Again, this is there's more to go into it, and Mr. Hashem will go a little more into it. But on a simple level, I stole the lulav yesterday. Today, I can't shake it. Not only I can't shake it today, it's not mine, but I can't shake it even the rest of Sukkot. Why can't I shake it the rest of Sukkot? Because the mitzvah b'avera. Even though it doesn't have to be mine anymore. It's not the end of Sukkot. I don't have to own it. But it's a mitzvah b'avera that they can't fulfill the mitzvah. So therefore, the Mishnah makes a blanket statement that a stolen lulav is not going to be valid anytime. Not only on the first day, but on none of the days. First day, it's not mine. The other days, it's called mitzvah b'avera. It came about through an avera. It wouldn't be valid. Now, the Gemara goes through this whole discussion. Which I mean, it's Rabbi Yochanan and the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai continues. The Gemara has a whole. It's a longer piece than that. Shenemei brings a pasuk, second line on page 38. Shenemei, as it says, v'vesim gozel. It says in the pasuk that you can bring stolen stuff, ves hapiseach, and also things that are blemished, like a piseach, which means it's lame. Ves hachoyle, so an animal that's sick. You got to bring all these things. And this is inappropriate to bring as a karban. These are inappropriate things, and the Gemara says the Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Shimon ben Yochai, he says that Bishlai skip the line. Ma pisech less leitakanto. I'm sorry, skipped a few words. Gozel dumya de pisech. Third line on the Gemara. Gozel, stolen, is very similar. Puts it next to the law of piseach, lame. Stolen and lame seem to be going in the same category. Look at how the pasuk read it. Gozel, vesa piseach, vesa choila. So it seemed to put them together. So the Gemara says you're supposed to compare the two. Ma piseach less leitakanta, just like an animal that's lame, it has no way that it's because it's called a mum kavua. This is called a permanent blemish. So it's not going to be able to be used even later. It's not like it's temporary, it's permanent. So the same thing that permanently it's going to be invalid, this lame animal. So the same thing is gozul, stolen, it's going to be permanently invalid. So it says, gezel dumya de pisech, stolen is similar to lame. Ma pisech less like just like lame animal is invalid. There's no way of rectifying it, or perfective fixing it. So I've guzzle also something that's stolen, less like takanta. There's no way of perfecting it or fixing it. There's no fixing. It's stolen. And then the Gemara adds this concept of giving up hope. The concept of giving up hope, I did explain a little more yesterday, that it has to do with the fact that when you own something, how do you relinquish that ownership? So if you sell it, the other guy paid, you did mashicha, did some type of kinyan, some act of acquisition, and ultimately you hand it to the person. The other person now owns it, and you have relinquished your ownership of it. But there is another concept of relinquishing ownership, and that is where person gives up hope. Now, it's not exactly as simple as I'm making it. When you give up hope, so what happens is that you remove yourself from ownership of that item. Now, the way the Gemara here is understanding it is that the recipient of the item, which is the ganav, the goslin, guy who stole it, so he is now, the understanding of the Gemara is, once I give up hope, it actually becomes his. Even if he doesn't do an act of acquisition after I have given up hope and relinquished my ownership, so to speak. I didn't do it actively relinquishing my ownership. Just the fact that I've shown that I'm giving up, that I gave up, I'm never getting that back. Like there's certain times that you think you might one day, someone's going to give something back to you. You know, you lent someone some money and you think, oh, he's good. He's gonna come back. Now he doesn't have money, but he will pay back. Then you have some people that they are never paying it back. You know, and you give up. You know you're not getting it. Someone made a pledge, and you know you're never going to get that. That is called giving up hope. Giving up hope, which it's not against the rules of bitachon, emunah bitachon. It's called being practical. You give up hope on certain things that's not worth thinking about. You're going to cause yourself more stress thinking that you're going to get it and hoping to get it. So sometimes it is good to be practical in that sense and say, no, the guy's never paying me back, and that's it. It's a loss. You write it off as a loss. That is called giving up, relinquishing your ownership, and it's a loss, and you know it, and you're being practical, and that's called yish. You lost something, and you know you're not getting it back after a few years already. You don't find it. You're not gonna. That's over. Must have been stolen. Must have been lost. Must have fallen somewhere in the garbage. You give up hope. Now, the other guy gains ownership of it when you give up hope. And what does that help if he gains ownership of it? That what it helps is that he is going to actually be able to keep that item, even though he does owe you. He may never pay you. I don't know if he'll want to do tshuva once, but he may want to pay you back, but he will never need to give you that item. That item he would never need to give you. Why? He's the owner of that item. He stole it. He gained ownership of it when you were meyayish, not when he stole it, but when you gave up hope, that's when he could gain ownership of it. And his ownership allows him to keep that. Even if he wants to pay you back, he doesn't have to pay you back with that item. He can keep that item and he pays you back cash value of it. So that is the meaning of he owns it. Now you would think, he now owns it, so he can shake it. Now he should be able to shake lulav and esrog with it. If he's so imagine you stole a lulav. In the first day of Sukkot, it has to be yours. And he says, it's mine. I stole it, but it became mine. Look, this is my lulav and esrog. So the thing is, not so simple. It's yours. True. It's yours. But it's a mitzvah b'avera, and even on the first day. That could be a mitzvah b'avera. So the common case on the first day, it's not yours. You stole it, it's not yours. But there could be a case where it is yours, where the guy's miyayish already, and still he's not fulfilling the mitzvah on the first day because it's called a mitzvah b'avera. Or the other cases where it's just a mitzvah b'avera. So even though you don't need it to be yours like the other days of Sukkot, nevertheless, it's a mitzvah b'avera, and it's not going to be valid to fulfill the mitzvah on Sukkot. So the Gemara continues. Yochanan neighbor Rishim ben Yechoy that Piseach is it's a permanent invalidation. Gozel is a permanent invalidation, and it doesn't matter if it's before Yush or after Yush. So the Gemara says, Bishlam Yush, or Rabbi Yochanan continues. He says, it's good before Yush. Adam Kiakar became Amrachman. Velavdideu. So before Yush, that's not yours. You can't bring a sacrifice. It says Mikem. You have to bring from your own. You can't bring someone else's sacrifice. You can't go and sacrifice someone else's animal. It has to be yours. So that's before Yush. He never gave up hope. It's his. It's not this sacrifice before the owner gave up hope from it. It's not the Goslin's. But after Yush, after the owner gave up hope, so now it belongs to the Goslin. Hakanya b'Yush, he gained ownership of it when the owner gave up hope, and so maybe over there you should be able to bring such a sacrifice. Rather, you can't bring such a sacrifice. Again, we're jumping from the laws of sacrifices to the laws of Sukkah. So you got to remember that it's not that we're talking about Sukkah really in this specific discussion. This specific discussion and dialogue, shouldn't say that. This specific paragraph maybe is better, is really talking about the laws of sacrifices. And it's mentioning that when you bring a sacrifice, even though it's yours, has to be yours. And even if it is yours, because the owner gave up hope, and it means he relinquished his ownership. And it means, according to this Gemara, the understanding is you now are the owner. It's in your possession. He relinquished ownership, so automatically you become the owner. Nevertheless, you can't bring it. It's similar to Piseach. Piseach, gozel like Piseach. That's what it says. Vavesim gozel vesa Piseach. So gozel, stolen, is just like Piseach. Piseach is never going to be valid. Gozel is never going to be valid, even after the guy gave up hope. Because why is it not valid? Because it's not about being yours now. It's about that it's a mitzvah b'avera. The problem is that it's a mitzvah that came about through an avera. Now comes the next piece of Gemara. What does it mean in the pasuk that it says, "I am Hashem who loves justice"? Soine gezel b'oila. I hate when a person brings a burnt offering from stolen goods. I hate that. I love mishpah. I love righteousness. But I can't stand soine gezel b'oila. I don't like stolen goods being used as an oil, as a burnt sacrifice. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai brings mashal, a parable, I'm sorry, mashal lemelech masav adam, to a king made of flesh and blood. He was passing through a toll booth, of a place of a tariff, of a tax. He told the servants, go pay the tax, pay the toll. So they said it. Pay the toll. You're taking money out of one pocket, putting it in the other pocket. Why should we waste our time doing this? We're going to pay him and then take the money back. Just keep it. Goodbye. Let it. We should just go through. He'll let us go through. Well, you're the king. So he says the whole tax is all yours. You want to pay it and then take it back? Amar lahem. He said to them, many yilmadu kol oivrei drachim. Many yilmadu kol oivrei drachim. All people who are traveling will learn from me. They won't escape the toll. They see me paying it, they'll also pay it. Yeah, it all comes to me in the end. True. But if I pay it, it'll come back to me. But people will see. It'll make an impact. So Abba Godesh Baruch Hashem said the same thing. And Hashem said, I hate stolen goods brought as a sacrifice. Many yilmadu b'nei banai. From me, my children will learn, and they will stay away, far away from gezel, from stolen goods. So when I say I won't take an oila, I won't take a burnt offering, stolen goods, it'll actually have an impact on my children. So therefore, the concept of stolen goods by the Eibishter, by Hashem, it is a wake-up call that for all things that are stolen are causing pain to Hashem. There are things that Hashem doesn't want any of the mitzvahs to be done. We should stay away from gezel, from all types of stolen goods. We're going to stop here. Have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone. Sei gesund.
Thank you, Rabbi.